Good evening. Welcome to the Maison Française. I'm Emmanuelle Sada. I'm the chair of the French department, and I'm thrilled to see so many colleagues, students, friends of the Maison Française tonight, friends of the Maison Française and also friends of Antoine. I suppose that I should start my very short introduction with the idea that one does not need to introduce Antoine Compagnon at Columbia, but I will still introduce him. Antoine Compagnon is the Blanche W. Knopf Professor of French and Comparative Literature at Columbia since 1985. And in the past 40 years, he has held joint appointments in France for most of those 40 years. First at the Sorbonne, then at the Collège de France, and now at the Académie Française, although I'm not sure we can call this an appointment, really. But one institution over all this time that he has remained faithful to, he has remained attached to, is Columbia. And we are very honored and very grateful for his commitment to our institution and to our department. Antoine is an extremely prolific writer, and I will not be able to I won't quote all his books, and I won't even be able to describe all the fields of scholarship he has covered, but maybe to sum up, I would say that he's very much un homme de la Renaissance, a humanist to whom nothing that is human seems alien. And this is very fitting because he started his career with working in the Renaissance and especially on Montaigne. And he has written many, many books over the years, spanning actually from two big bookends, Montaigne and Proust, with other authors in the mix, obviously Pascal, Baudelaire, and Colette. He has also produced books that were not monographs on specific authors, but reflection on a much larger swath of French literary history, for example, with La Troisième République des Lettres, or The Anti-Moderne de Joseph de Maistre à Roland Barthes. The first one was published in 1983, the second one in 2005. And finally, I would say that Antoine has also explored very productively the relationship between history and theory in literature, with books such as La Seconde Main, ou Le Travail de la Citation, that was, also largely coming from a reflection on Montaigne, but that's a work that really think about quotation in the work that quotations do in literary theory. I remember reading this when I was 20 in Hippocagne, and I still have this this incredible memory of being exposed to that as a young woman. And also his reflection on theory and reflection between the relationship between theory and history and literature was also explored in Le Démon de la Théorie in 1998. In the past few years, he has extended the register of his work with very successful podcasts that were broadcast on the French radio, Un été avec Montaigne, Un été avec Pascal, Un été avec Proust, another été with Colette. And all these podcasts were actually turned into books, into short books, and as those were wonderful occasions for him to kind of have his scholarship reach a larger audience. And tonight he presents yet another facet of his work with a new foray, at least new to me, into art history, with a lecture on Matisse. Matisse, an artist for all seasons, and this is part of a catalog for an exhibition for a catalog, right? That is so he's preparing. Antoine is participating into the catalog for the exhibition on Matisse that is going to take place in Paris in March 2026, and he's also preparing another podcast. So I'm not sure the talk tonight is based on the podcast on the exhibit, but he's preparing another podcast on Matisse. Maybe it's an hiver avec Matisse, right? that is a winter with Matisse, right? It's going to be, which you need Matisse in winter, right? That is going to be broadcast in France in December, starting in December, or at least at some point during the holiday vacations. So please welcome, join me in welcoming Antoine Compagnon, the Columbia humanist. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Emmanuel, and thank you for being here. I think the first time I spoke in this room was a couple of years before I was a professor here, so it's about 45 years ago, in the same room. We spoke from the other direction at that time. The direction changed. Now, some of you might be wondering what I have to do with Matisse. I know nothing about Matisse. A friend of mine who is an art historian told me, what do you know about Matisse? Why do you pretend to now to speak and write about Matisse? Why don't you stick to literature, to Montaigne, Baudelaire, and Proust, and some others? Well, let me say first that there are connections, minor connections between these authors. Montaigne, I don't think I can find any relationship between Montaigne and Matisse except the letter M at the start of the word. But with Proust, Proust and Matisse are perfect contemporaries. Matisse was born in 1869, Proust in 1871. Of course, Proust died early in 1922 and Matisse in 1954. So he had a much longer life and a much longer artistic career. But I'm pretty sure Proust and Matisse met. And they probably met, I have a pointer, in front of, no, it's not, in front of Chardin Larrey, because during the 1890s, the mid-1890s, Matisse was at the Louvre almost on a daily basis when he was a student in the studio of Gustave Moreau. And in those years, 1890s, Proust was also every day at the Louvre, and in particular, this is where he gave meetings to, he gave rendezvous to Lucien Daudet, his boyfriend, who was a student at the Académie Julien. And they went to see the same paintings, Poussin, Watteau, Chardin. So they, Matisse was for this, Arrêt de Chardin was copied between 1896 and 1903, so I suspect that they were at the same time looking at Chardin's Ré, which one copied and which the other admired during the same years. Of course, then there's the painter Elstir in the Recherche. Elstir, if you remember, has a first period, which is mythologic, and this makes us think of Gustave Moreau. So there's another connection between Proust and Matisse, which is Gustave Moreau. Matisse was a student of Moreau, Proust was an admirer of Moreau, and Elstir has a first period, which is a Moreau style. And then he has a second period, which is Japanism. Unfortunately, he has a third period, which is Monet, Impressionism. Unfortunately, he doesn't have a fourth period. There isn't a fourth matière which would take us to Fauvism and to Matisse. But there's a passage in Proust which there's a page that I can never read without thinking of Matisse. This is when the silly Madame Cottard, in Swan in Love, describes the blue and yellow women of our friend Biche, the nickname of the young Elstir, at the Verdurin, before his mythological period. And when she meets a swan in the omnibus at the end of Swan in Love, she says, it's less strange. She's speaking of a portrait of her husband, Dr. Cottard, that Elstir is painting, and she says, it's less strange. I must tell you, it's less strange than what he usually does, but he had to give him blue mustaches, as if he didn't know how a shoulder was constructed and that women don't have mauve hair. So when I read this description, blue and yellow women, mauve hair, a blue mustache, this doesn't make sense in the 1880s. Nobody paints blue mustache and red hair in the 1880s, which is the time of Swan in Love, but rather at the price of an anachronism, the years around 1908, when Matisse paints the Femme au Chapeau, the Raie Verte, which you have here, the Raie Verte. So I chose the Raie because of Chardin. This is not, of course, the same Raie, but La Raie Verte, this is a perfect portrait of Dr. Cottard, the green stripe of the green line, which was exhibited at the Salon des Indépendants in 1906. So there is Matisse in Swan in Love. So in a sense, I'm justified to speak of Matisse. Then, of course, there is Baudelaire. Baudelaire is a major reference for Matisse. Matisse was a Baudelarian. He always carried the fleur du mal. In 1896, when his first trip to Brittany, the first time he goes to the sea and to the sun, he has a notebook, and in that notebook, he copies two poems by Baudelaire. Les Phares, of course, on his heroes, Rembrandt, Delacroix, Goya. And the other poem is L'Idéal, L'Idéal, which makes an opposition with the ideal, the good painters, and commercial painting. So these two poems are essential for the young Matisse. And of course, as I said, Matisse will always remain a Baudelarian. He will illustrate, this is the wrong way, yeah. He will illustrate the Tombeau de Baudelaire in Mallarmé's Poésie in 1932, and this is a page of study in Baltimore. He worked with the photographs of Baudelaire and was looking for the right illustration of Baudelaire. And then in 1947, he illustrated an edition of The Flowers of Vivant, the Fleur du Mal. So Matisse was the most Baudelarian of painters, and I haven't yet cited the most important poem, which gives its title, Luxe, Calme et Volupté, a quotation of Le Voyage for his major painting of 1904, from L'Invitation au Voyage, in the tradition of nudes in a landscape, with a reference also to the Déjeuner sur l'herbe of Manet. So we are between Poussin and Manet in this Luxe, Calme et Volupté. So, yes, as I said, Matisse is the most Baudelarian of modern poets, which gives me another justification to venture into this territory. The third justification is a book I published a couple of years ago, which was called, in French, La vie derrière soi, which hasn't been translated in English. I would translate it as something like The Life Behind. This was based on my last series of lectures at the Collège de France, and it's a book on late careers. How does an artist, a writer, a painter manage to end well? So it's on the notions of late style, on the notion which which is from Adorno and Edward Said, of the notion of what I call senile sublime, the sublimity that one reaches with senility, which is an expression that I borrow from Barbara Ernstein-Smith. And late style, senile sublime, is when an artist breaks at the end of his life with a tradition that he or she has himself or herself created. And there are two conditions for late style: breaking a revolution with one's own tradition, and the other condition for late style is to be an anticipation of the future generations. I think these are the two necessary traits for late style or senile sublime. And as Emmanuel said, there is an exhibition that is being prepared called Matisse 1941-1954, which will take place this spring at the Grand Palais. And the curator, Claudine Gramont, who had read my book, The Life Behind, asked me to write a contribution to the catalogue on Matisse's late style or sublime senile. Would he be a good exemplar, a good illustration? Was he on the side of repetition, routine, or of breakaway and anticipation? And of course, there is an issue that I deal with in that book. I don't discuss Matisse at all in that book, but I discuss a polarity in artists, which has been well described by David Hockney. We had a talk on David Hockney a couple of weeks ago. David Hockney famously said, Picasso was a rare prodigy. Cézanne was not a prodigy. His art was a hard-earned skill that took a lot of time. So this is a very interesting polarity between Cézanne and Picasso. A couple of opposites, two sides. Gertrude Stein, when she speaks of Matisse and Picasso, she says Matisse and Picasso, it's like the North Pole and the South Pole. I think she's wrong. The North Pole and the South Pole are Picasso and Cézanne. And Matisse, precisely, is somewhere in between in this spectrum. There are many possible positions between the North Pole and the South Pole, between Picasso and Cézanne. Where do we situate Matisse on that scale? The side of talent, the side of genius, the side of stubbornness, or the stubbornness of Cézanne, or the side of versatility and constant revolutions and coups like Picasso. There's an article by Isaiah Berlin, which I love. I loved Isaiah Berlin, who is one of the greatest remarkable men I met. This article is the essay, The Hedgehog and the Fox. The famous essay based on a line by Archilochus, a fox knows many things, but a hedgehog knows one big thing. And Isaiah Berlin makes a distinction. There's no hierarchy between these two poles in Isaiah Berlin, but it's simply two types of brains, two types of men and women, of artists in general. And I don't always agree with his classification because, for instance, he situates Proust on the side of the hedgehog, while for me Proust is a fox. He is a fox disguised in a hedgehog. But we shouldn't be too focused on his theory, involuntary memory. Is it really important for the research? What is important for the research is the versatility, the movement, the constant movement, and the details. The best artists, in my mind, are foxes disguised in hedgehogs. On my sword at the Académie Française, there is a hedgehog, but it's a disguise, of course. So this opposition is clearly important to me because Picasso and Cézanne, I would say, were the two major references for Matisse. Picasso, the enemy brother, the friend and the rival, the constant rival, and Matisse, and Cézanne, whom Matisse called the god. The god was Matisse. It's very interesting. I will speak of the New York museums in a short moment. At the Metropolitan, the Matisses are split in two rooms. One on the second floor next to Cézanne, and one on the first floor with Picasso. So the two references are always Cézanne and Picasso, the hedgehog and the fox, we could say, or the prodigy and the talent. So there's no hierarchy. These are the two giants, and we remember that Matisse bought a Cézanne in 1899, Les Trois Baigneuses, the model for all his nudes in landscape. And it is at a time when Matisse was very poor. He was indebted. He spent money that he didn't have to buy this Matisse. And when he gave it to the Petit Palais 48 years later, he said that he hadn't yet discovered all the importance of that painting, which was crucial for him in all those years. While Picasso and Matisse exchanged paintings in 1907. These are the two paintings. Each one shows a gift among the paintings of the other. So they are about the same size. And Gertrude Stein, who was nasty, said that they chose each the other's painting, which was undoubtedly the least interesting that either of them had ever done. Later, each used it as an example of the other's weaknesses. This is totally false, totally false. They both admired the one they had chosen, but this gives you an idea. So there are not that many examples in the French artistic tradition of senile sublime. When we think of senile sublime, we think of Goethe, Rembrandt, Beethoven. These are the major examples. In the French literary tradition, one might think of Chateaubriand, but the French literary tradition has more to do with people like Rimbaud, who have finished writing at the age of 18. This is the idea, the avant-garde, more than the senile sublime. Picasso was still an avant-gardist when he was 90, but this is quite exceptional. So there are not that many examples of senile sublime in the French tradition, but I believe that Matisse was one, is a perfect illustration of that notion of late style and senile sublime, and it allows to precisely pinpoint his place on this Cézanne-Picasso scale. In 1941, Matisse had a very heavy intestinal surgery, and after that, what he calls his second life, the second life like a rebirth or a resurrection, and he compares himself often to Lazarus in the sense of that vita nova. Matisse had a vita nova, and we should not forget the meaning of novus, nova, in vita nova. Novus in Latin means last. It means new only because it means last. A new life is the last life, the latest life. So he had a vita nova after an impasse in the late 1930s. And this vita nova is, of course, good examples is the chapel in Vence and the cutouts. So Matisse, after 70 and very handicapped, had very little physical means and was doing his best with limited resources. And this is the, I would say, the best condition to go to the essential, to the sublime. His last paintings, I think, are quite banal, but the cutouts, such as Sorrow of the King in 1952, are striking and are an opening to a new world of art. And of course, Matisse's nickname among his friends in the studio of Gustave Moreau was the professor, because he wore glasses, he was always very self-conscious of the way he dressed. He was a bourgeois. So they called him the professor of the doctor. He looked like a professor, a doctor, which means that he theorized what he was doing. So there are a lot of text, interviews about this second life that he leads at that moment, and he constantly hesitates between describing it as a continuity or as a discontinuity with what he has been doing for 70 years or at least 50 years of artistic career. His breakthrough in his second life is as decisive as the breakthrough of 1905, that of the summer of 1905, with paintings like the Open Window, which is at the National Gallery in Washington, which is really the opening of the Fauvism and the new Matisse. The breakthrough is extraordinary, but Matisse always hesitates on how to describe it. Is it a coronation or is it a break? And we can probably think that Matisse's thought is rather dialectical between the negative and the positive. He will describe it as a sublation and as a more than a, let's say, rupture or break. If we think, I think that we can describe it as a new departure with this model, and in particular with the first cutouts when he discovered the formula of the cutout, which is the series of stencils called Jazz, which is now on show at the Metropolitan Museum. So I recommend that you go and see it. It's in the selection of the Department of Prints and Drawings is Matisse's Jazz. So I think that in Matisse, we have all the elements of late style or sublime senile. It is at the same time reduced to the essence, to the essential, and anticipatory of the next generation. And this next generation is, of course, the American painters of post-World War II, and in particular, Rothko, who painted this homage to Matisse in 1954, the year of his death. So my catalogue piece is done. The corrected proofs, I corrected the proofs in August, and I thought I was done with Matisse. And just before I left Paris during Labor Day weekend, I was asked if I would do a podcast on Matisse called A Winter with Matisse, on the model of the four that I did on literature, a summer with Montaigne, Baudelaire, Pascal, Colette. So I accepted, stupidly, because I was free. I had just finished a book which is coming out in January, so I arrived in New York on Labor Day, and I had nothing to do, so I accepted that, and I said I will do it if it's the formula of the ones on literature, 40 segments of 4 minutes. This is it's nice to have a format, then it becomes an exercise, like doing a dissertation in French high schools. Once you know how to do it, you can do a dissertation on anything. If you have a sort of metronome of 4 minutes, which means an average of 630 words, you can do it like a recipe. So I arrived in New York on Labor Day. I had agreed to do that, and the book is supposed to come out in March, but not a single line was written. And then a couple of weeks ago, they told me that they wanted to accelerate because they would like some of these recordings to be broadcast during the break, the Christmas, New Year break. They wanted to have like a teaser for the podcast and the exhibition. So I had to finish writing my 40 episodes for last weekend. And I'm going to Paris next week to make the recordings of in fact, I wrote 43 episodes. So it was an interesting challenge because I didn't have a lot of time, because I don't know much about Matisse, I confess, except that I had written this catalog entry. And the challenge was also that I had to deal with paintings and with descriptions. And I found it rather challenging not to spend the whole time describing the painting. So what I will do now is give you a number of examples from the 43 pieces that I wrote. And I chose about 10 minutes, 40 minutes each, which means that I won't do them all. And I chose paintings or works that are mostly from New York, because you can go and see them next weekend, from MoMA and Met, which in a sense will be overrepresented in my podcast. But I think it is fatal, because we should remember that the first collectors of Matisse were the Stein family, Leo and his brother and his sister Gertrude, Michael and his wife Sarah, then the sisters Cohn in Baltimore, then Albert Barnes in Marion and Philadelphia. So the American collectors were hugely overrepresented. And of course, the others were the Russian that you can see in St. Petersburg and Moscow. So I chose a couple, and I will do now a couple of these segments that will be recorded when I go to Paris next week. The first one I chose is, no, I have this, is the piano lesson at MoMA. So Matisse left us around 1,000 paintings, thousands of drawings, hundreds of gouache cutouts, and about 80 sculptures. So you see, I have 40, which is a very limited selection. It is impossible to talk even of the most famous masterpieces. This season with Matisse will necessarily be very partial, and I will talk about works that for one reason or another touch me. The choice will be personal and that of an amateur. And for every beloved artist, I think that we have a work etched in our minds, with which we identify, which we see again when we hear their names and we close our eyes. It's often the first work of this artist that we discovered. or the first work that really caught our attention. And in that sense, I chose this one because this is my ideal Matisse. I saw it when I was 14. At the time, we were living in Washington, D.C., and I was surprised because when I started this, I thought, why isn't my ideal Matisse a National Gallery Matisse? Because my artistic education comes from the National Gallery in Washington, where I went when I was a teenager. Before that, in Paris, I went to the Louvre, but for the Egyptian section and the Greek section, because I was in classes of 6e and 5e, we studied the Egypt and the Greeks, and so this is what I went to see at the Louvre. My artistic education comes from the National Gallery, and it's not a painting, and my Matisse ideal painting is not from the National Gallery. So I was quite, I thought it was bizarre. This is at the National Gallery. But of course, it entered the National Gallery in 1998. So there were very few Matisse paintings, in fact, at the time when I came to New York. And I would like to recover the innocence of what I felt when I first saw that painting. I came to New York. I was alone in New York for 1 week. This was in August of 1965. I was staying in an apartment of a childhood friend of my mother who had left Belgium in 1940 at the start of the war. And this was an apartment on 85th Street between Fifth Avenue and Madison Avenue, where I very often came until the first night I came as a professor at Columbia. This is where I stayed before I bought a futon for my apartment on Claremont Avenue. So this was my place in New York. I was alone at the age of 15, and I explored the museums, and this is when I saw that painting and fell in love with that painting. Of course, I cannot recover the innocence of that first scene when I discovered it, but it's a boy about my age, plays the piano. His hair is close cropped. His features are simplified. The eye, the eyebrow, the nose, the mouth are reduced to signs, to lines. And what stops me, and what still stops me in this painting, is the wedge dug into his skull, orange and black, between 10 p.m. and midnight, like a wound more than a shadow, a broken face of a girl cassée. So what is also disturbing for a teenager, I guess what I was, is that the whole anecdote is deported to the periphery of the canvas. Everything happens at the bottom and the right side. The boy is at the bottom right. A barely sketched silhouette towers over him on a high stool. In the bottom left corner, you have a gilded sculpture representing a seated woman. On the piano, a metronome and a candle. There's a candle on the piano in Proust, a famous candle in the concert at the Saint-Euvert. I don't know why they had a candle on the piano, and the candle almost falls in Proust. So there's another Proustian hint there. The entire top left of the painting is empty, so we will find this very often in Matisse, these empty surfaces. Is empty, an open window above the wrought iron support, apart from a green trapezoid. Everybody mentions a triangle since Alfred Barr, but for me it's a trapezoid that is there. The entire surface is occupied by a gray background, the wall of the room, the obscurity in the garden. For light, we have an orange band along the window and the reflection of something like the setting sun on the piano lid, whose Pleyel mark appears on the reverse of the ornate music stand, which, with its curves, extends the ironwork of the window. Of course, now all my attention is focused on this black square between the I work and the Pleyel letters in reverse. What always strikes me is the boy's the decentering of this painting. Of course, now I know that he is the son of the artist, Pierre Matisse, who would later have an art gallery in New York, and who used to take his clients to MoMA to show them his father's portrait of him. I also know that the large figure is a painting by Matisse, and that the sculpture there is a sculpture that by Matisse, so that he's watched. These two women are substitutes of the father surveying the son, who wanted his sons to become a musician, which Pierre Matisse reacted again. What I like also about this painting is, which I discover whenever I see it, is the lack of finish and the drops of pink above the score on the pulpit. But the painting, as I said, will remain my ideal Matisse. And it still does. It's the one I see when I close my eyes. The second one I will discuss is one at the Metropolitan Museum, the Young Sailor 2. We often have pairs in Matisse. There's a Young Sailor 1, which is more realistic or descriptive, and there's in general a movement from descriptive to more expressive or even abstract. So what I like about this Young Sailor, of course, is that it hangs very close to the Picasso Gertrude Stein. And what I like also is that they placed another portrait in between, Soutine's portrait of Madeleine Castin, in a totally different style and different period. And Picasso had just met, Picasso and Matisse had just met through Leo and Gertrude Stein, who discovered them at the same time. And as I said, hence started the friendship and rivalry of these two giants. Matisse, there's a word by Matisse at that time, Matisse who said to Max Jacob, if I weren't doing what I am doing, I would like to paint like Picasso. To which Max Jacob replied, Picasso made the same remark to me about you. So this gives you a sense of this couple in those years. To be able to embrace Gertrude Stein and the Young Sailor at a glance, I think there's no finer gift from heaven to see them together. And of course, I added the African statue that Matisse bought at the shop of the Père Sauvage at the corner Rue de Rennes of Gertrude Stein and brought, and this is the statue which transformed the paintings, both of Matisse and Picasso, which have the same eyes, the eyes of Gertrude Stein and the eyes of the young sailor. It's the eyes that stop me, whereas in Picasso, everything is dark, brown. I mean, the famous corduroy, brown corduroy sack of Gertrude, and the agile boy from Collioure with his harlequin socks. Of course, Picasso, when he was told that Gertrude Stein, that it didn't look like Gertrude Stein, said, don't worry, it will. Which it does, So we have the colors of the Matisse, the green trousers, the blue sweater, the dominant colors, and the stripes of the T-shirt under the jersey. And what I like too is the sort of nonchalant pose with the arm, the casualness of the pose, the position of the hands, the right hand resting on the thigh or tucked into the pocket, and the left supporting the head in a position that recalls melancholy. And let's say a word of the cap, which is very confusing, as confusing as Charles Bovary's cap at the beginning of Madame Bovary. There is blue and green. Is the blue the cap and the green the hair and a lock of hair sticking out to the right of the cap? Or is it the shadow cast by the visor? The eyebrows and the upper lip are also green. The young sailor number 1 was a study that Michael Stein bought for their apartment, but the facial features were not yet schematized in the manner of a primitive artist. They had not been, let's say, universalized. It was still an individual representation. From a sailor from Collioure, Matisse made the young sailor number 2 of Always, just as Picasso gave his portrait of Gertrude the slanted eyes of the eternal Gertrude Stein. The third piece I will choose is one that is at MoMA again. This is the open window at, no, not the open, the blue window at MoMA, painted in 1913. And of course, Matisse painted numerous windows. It's one of his favorite themes. I mentioned, yes, the open window earlier. This one is in New York for reasons that shouldn't be mentioned. In fact, when Matisse painted it in 1913, it was supposed to be for the couturier Jacques Doucet, who deemed it too advanced for him. Strangely, a couple of years later, he bought Goldfish and Palette, which is also at MoMA, and which is undoubtedly much more advanced. And I guess it was much too advanced for him, but he kept it. So in this painting, we have this all-over blue veil, which Matisse adopted after his visits to Morocco in 1912, 1913. And the window is the window of the Matisse bedroom in their Issy-les-Moulineaux house. Various objects are placed on what the experts tell us is the mantelpiece of the chimney. It was elegant at the time to have a window above the chimney. The chimney flues would go along the window. When I was a child, when we went to a vacation house in Compiègne in the north, and there was the similar thing, which as kids we loved, to have a window above it, a chimney. So in any case, we are told that this was a chimney and a number of objects on that mantelpiece, from the left to the right, a vase decorated with black stems, perhaps hat pins stuck in a cushion. Some critics see a shell, but I tend to approve the hat pins in a cushion because it's like a dressing table, in fact, for Mrs. Matisse. Then you have a bouquet of flowers in another vase placed on a dolly, the cast of a veiled female head, a lamp against which rests a square mirror framed in red, and an ochre cup containing a blue brooch. My contribution to Matisse scholarship is that I identified the head which nobody, it seems, had yet identified. They say it's a Chaldean head or ancient head. I spent one night of insomnia checking all the heads at the Louvre, and I discovered this one, Tête portant une coiffe conique, Cerro de los Santos, moulage. So it's a casting, and I thought I shouldn't stop there, and I found the original, which is in Madrid, in the Archaeological Museum in Madrid. So this is a footnote to Matisse scholarship. But this footnote is not uninteresting. Matisse went to Spain, and Matisse, when he traveled, collected pots and pans, props for his painting. There's a beautiful photograph in Aragon, Henri Matisse roman, where Matisse collected all his props. Aragon calls it une palette d'objets, all the objects. And you have objects like this coffee pot, which you see in about, for 30 years you see it on all of Matisse's paintings. But the head appears only once. It's not uninteresting because it came from an archaeological, a Franco-Spanish archaeological dig, and that's why at the Louvre they have a cast and the original in Madrid. But other figures, I'm worried, but I'm going to say, two other figures from the same series, small figurines, were stolen at the Louvre. It's not a day when you can discuss burglary at the Louvre, but these two other figurines were stolen in 1907 by Apollinaire's secretary. It's a famous episode, and Picasso was accused of recel because he gave them or sold them to Picasso. So he had received stolen goods. And as a consequence of these two figurines that come with this one, the Louvre had the originals. In 1911, when the Mona Lisa was stolen at the Louvre, when the Mona Lisa was stolen at the Louvre, it's the last serious episode before last weekend. Apollinaire went to jail, was suspected, and Picasso suffered from anxieties for a number of days because he had received stolen goods. So they belong to the same series. But this painting, I will go quickly about it. There's this large blue area, covers the entire surface, but we see green, pink, and ochre rise here and there according to the porosity of the areas. The painting was first published, a reproduction was first published in 1914 in Les Soirées de Paris, Apollinaire's journal, under the title La glace sans teint, the one-way glass, the one-way mirror. The glace sans teint is a one-way mirror. So there's I haven't yet completely decided what is the glace sans teint. In general, it seems that Matisse critics think that this is what's called a black mirror, the mirror that landscape painters use to paint what's in the mirror and not what they see. Corot painted from a black mirror. He didn't paint the view that was beside him. He painted what was in the mirror. A black mirror has the two consequences. The frame, you search for the exact frame before you do the painting, and then you keep it exactly the way you want. And the other advantage of a black mirror is that it suppresses the colors. And then the colors don't disturb you because the colors change all the time during the day when you paint outside. So, and Matisse used a black mirror, but I'm not that positive that a black mirror is not a one-way mirror. I think the one-way mirror is the window, which is a substitute for the place where you have a mirror in a bourgeois home. In any case, this painting is at MoMA because when Jacques Doucet didn't buy it, Matisse sold it to a German collector, Osthaus, and it ended in the Folkwang Museum in Essen, Germany, where in 1937 it was confiscated by the Nazi regime. As a consequence, it was auctioned in June 1939 in Lucerne, Switzerland, among a group of 126 paintings and sculptures of so-called degenerate art by the Fischer Gallery in Lucerne. And this is where the MoMA purchased it. Alfred Barr purchased it, its visionary director, through two intermediates. One is Kurt Valentin, a famous Jewish agent who had been sent to New York by the Berlin government and who opened a gallery where confiscated works in Germany were sold in the US. When the deal was done, this is what Alfred Barr wrote: "I am relieved not to see the museum's name or my own associated with the auction." So this is why it's at MoMA. It's one of his treasures, one of its Matisse treasures, and you will enjoy it. But it's here though, for reasons that are, well, that we shouldn't discuss too much. Can I do another one? So let me choose, because I only did three. Which one will I do? I did two from MoMA. I might do one from the Metropolitan. Yeah. This is. Too bad, we will skip this. But we will go to the Metropolitan for this one. So this was last Sunday, or the Sunday before last. I went to the Metropolitan and I wanted to see this painting again, the Lorette sur fond noir. And I arrived at the second floor, and on the way, some rooms were closed, and I had to make my way through the Islamic art department. And suddenly I thought, why don't I stop at the Islamic art department and perhaps see a number of works that Matisse liked, because Islamic art was crucial for Matisse. So I slowed down. Instead of rushing to see my painting, I took the opportunity to look for the kind of objects that might have inspired Matisse. And I soon stopped in front of an immense Persian carpet displayed vertically, where I tend to recognize some of Matisse's arabesque. For instance, in La Desserte Rouge, of course, there is a toile de Jouy, which is used in this painting, but the arabesque doesn't look like the one in the toile de Jouy. So I was in front of that huge vertical carpet, and there was a very old man sitting on the bench in front of the carpet. So I took that picture of the detail, and he asked me why I was taking a picture of that there are many better pictures if you look at the site of the Metropolitan, as we all know. And I told him that I'm interested only in this little blue detail, and that's why I take it. So we started a conversation, and he told me that he owned a similar carpet in Illinois, and that there was a third carpet at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. So we started a long conversation. He told me that he had bought his carpet at an estate sale of a Manhattan Project physicist. He was Armenian, 95, and had donated to the Metropolitan Museum a precious vase that he no longer sees in the room where we were, and was not very happy not to see his vase in that room. He told me that he had bought that vase, which he gave to the Met, when he saw it as an umbrella stand in a gallery in New York. And now it was at the Met, but not in the room. So we discussed, we looked at the red side table on the telephone. He was surprised that the red differs in all the reproduction, because this red is very difficult for the photographies. The red of Matisse. Matisse says that he doesn't know where his red comes from, why he chose the red in the red studio, why he chose the red. My personal idea is that he chose the red because in Russian it's the beautiful color. Red is the beautiful. And some of those, and most of those paintings started for the Russian collectors. In any case, we had a long discussion, and of course these paintings, the name of these carpets, they are called vase carpets. Vase carpets because there's a vase motif on those carpets. And I told him about Matisse visiting the Islamic Arts exhibition in Munich in 1910, which made a huge impact on his work after 1910 and his taste for the arabesque. So then I went back to, because I had come to see this painting, which of course I like a lot also, which is a pair with the studio, another major theme in Matisse, the studio. And we have, as you see, we have three Lorette in her armchair. The one at the Met and the one in Paris at the Musée National d'Art Moderne. This is Matisse's studio, Quai Saint-Michel, with always the ironwork of the window and the Préfecture de Police across the Seine, viewed from his studio. And there are many studios in Matisse, but this is the only one where there is this sort of mise en abîme. I don't think there's any other one with a similar mise en abîme. And what I like in this painting, I would say, is the large black panel. I have a piece on Matisse's black. There's a lot. Matisse is the painter of colors, but black is a color for Matisse. And black is a cruche black, and he says that he borrowed black as a color from Manet. In Manet, black is a color, and this is black becomes a color in Matisse. So there's a lot of black, including in this one. And then the reason I thought it was important to have it, it's among my 40 pieces, it's the only one on the armchair. And as you probably know, there is a very famous saying by Matisse in his notes of a painter of 1908, which is an important theoretical text very early in his career. There is a sentence that has been everywhere ever since. Matisse writes, "What I dream is an art of balance, of purity, of tranquility, without disturbing or preoccupying subject, which is something analogous to a good armchair that relaxes from physical fatigue." So you see, this again enters this sort of polarity, Picasso-Matisse. Picasso is not looking for an art which is like an armchair, with tranquility and serenity. So Matisse truly dreamed of a decorative art that would bring serenity. And this is at the time of the scandals of the woman with her hat, the green stripe, and the joy of life. At the same time, Lorette, this painting, was painted in 1916, 1917, which is exactly the time of when Matisse leaves Paris, leaves the avant-garde movement, and goes to Nice, where he will paint during the 1920s the odalisque, which is a movement that some have called the retour à l'ordre of the post-World War I. So this is a sort of a transitional painting between the Matisse that I would have discussed, the most difficult Matisse of 1916, the paintings of 1916, and the return to the odalisque. I think I will stop here. I would have liked to discuss as a last piece the Barnes collection, which is, of course, a crucial part of the American Matisse. And I think we don't have time, or do we?
Yes. We should stop here, take questions, and we can
Okay.
listen to the podcast. And,
Okay. It was simply to be out of New York, because I spoke of works that are at MoMA and Met only. We could have gone to Baltimore or to Philadelphia for some of the other Matisses.
we have now time for questions. There are mics. There will be mics one here, one there. There are questions. I'm back. Sure.
What?
You want, if there is a request for the Barnes collection.
They want me to speak of the Barnes collection. If you want. If you want. This is about the Barnes collection. So, as you understand, I put together this series, Winter with Matisse, since in the last 2 months. So I did it from New York. So that's why there is, as I said, a sort of over-representation of New York paintings. But this over-representation, as I also said, is fatal because of the... In fact, there are very few Matisse in France of the best periods because nobody collected Matisse. They went to Russia, the US, Germany, a little. But there are almost no Matisses of the, let's say, the best periods in France. The best one is the Intérieur aux Aubergines in the Museum of Grenoble, which was given by Matisse in 1922 because the director of the museum had been at the atelier of Gustave Moreau. So you see this, it's strange to think that Gustave Moreau was so essential for Matisse. All his friends come from the Gustave Moreau studio, and let's say that the most important Matisse in France is a gift to an ex-student of Gustave Moreau in Grenoble. So there are very few. So Barnes, of course, Barnes is a crucial collector of Matisse. I put off my visit to the Barnes collection until the end. In fact, I hadn't been back to the Barnes Foundation since my first years at Columbia, which means probably 1986 or 1987, which is quite a long time ago. At the time, the Barnes Foundation was closed to the public. And it was in Marion, quite inaccessible outside Philadelphia. I was teaching in the afternoon at the University, at UPenn at the time. And twice we did it. Students who waited for me in the morning at the station, the train station in 30th Street Station, I think it's called, in Philadelphia, and we went to the Barnes. Yes, it was not open to the public. So this is a big change when you visit the Barnes Foundation nowadays. So why did I want to speak of the, what can I say about the dance? But of course, there's also le bonheur de vivre, joy of life, which is also there, and others. Because I think it's the best illustration of what Yves Alain-Bois, who was with me at Barthes Seminar 50 years ago. So we were friends at Barthes Seminar in the early 1970s. And I remember visiting, which you will understand the connection, visiting a Motherwell exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in Paris, probably 1974, I would say. And then of course, Motherwell is one of those who acknowledged their debt to Matisse, the late Matisse of the cutouts. So I think it's the best illustration of what Yves Alain-Bois calls Matisse's equation, the definition of art: quantity equals quality. And this is the case, I think it's obvious, with the dance commissioned by Barnes in 1930. So I chose on purpose not to show you a reproduction of the dance, which doesn't make sense. It's so huge, so big, and I chose a small study for the dance, which is 31 by 55 centimeters, which you can handle. So this is in Aragon's Henri Matisse roman that he reports Matisse's crucial words. Matisse says, 1 square centimeter of blue is not as blue as, no, 1 square centimeter, sorry, of one color is not equal to 1 centimeter of another color. And this is the theory of colors. If you have two surfaces that are identical with two different colors, they will look different. So you have to adjust the size of the surface to the color. This is pure theory of colors. And then Matisse adds, and this is Matisse, this is not the theory, 1 square centimeter of blue is not as blue as a square meter of the same blue. And for Yves Alain-Bois, this is, let's say, the most important theoretical pronouncement in Matisse, which in his view, he reached with the Bonheur de Vivre, with the painting, which is also at the Barnes Foundations. In other words, it's all a matter of surface. And as Matisse says, a model is of little use in appreciating a work, the effect of a work. So this is a model because it's on a page for this huge 13 meters by 3 meters dance at the Barnes Foundation. And Matisse said, the artist who wants to transfer a composition from one canvas to a larger canvas must, in order to preserve its expression, conceive it anew, modify its appearance, and not simply square it. And in a sense, this explains why in Matisse there are so many pairs, because the first of the pair is often a study for the final painting. It can also go the other way, but in general, it is this way that it goes. So I would say that to prepare the decoration for the immense ogival lunette of the Mérion atrium, the painter began with drawings and gouache. But then, to work to scale, he rented a garage in Nice and perfected two essential techniques. One, the technique of charcoal fixed to the tip of a long bamboo in order to draw, which came with in the garage for the dance, the Barnes Foundation dance. And two, the second technique was these colored surfaces, gouache surfaces, to adjust quantity and quality with these huge pages painted with gouache, blue, pink, and black around the white of the figures in Mérion, and thus achieve quality. And there is a very interesting letter by Pierre Matisse to his parents. Pierre Matisse was in New York, an art dealer, and so he was the mediator between Barnes and Matisse in Paris. And he wrote to his parents, "Naturally, I didn't say anything about how Papa works. I mean the paper cutouts, the cutouts that Matisse used to adjust the size and the shape." So Pierre Matisse wrote to his parents. He hadn't understood that these cutouts finally embodied what had been his father's fixed idea for decades: quantity equals quality. So this discovery wasn't yet ready, even for him, for his son, who was his art dealer in Paris. Then, of course, I will conclude with this, there were setbacks. As we know, the lunettes in Mérion had been measured incorrectly, and Matisse had to start all over again. And as a result, we have two dances, one in Philadelphia and one in Paris, which means that nobody has to cross the Atlantic to admire the dance, and there are partisans of both versions, so you can save on your footprint by seeing the dance that is on your side of the Atlantic. Thank you.
When you're representing those works and your thoughts and your comments on those works, obviously we could see that.
What?
We could see the. Thank you. We could not hear, but we could see the paintings, right? So I'm wondering when you do this format of 4 minutes on the radio, on the podcast, what's your technique to make those paintings, alive, like in the imagination of the listener, right?
As I said, this is the challenge. Oh, no, I can go back. As I said, this is the challenge because it will first be as a podcast. Well, the book will come out in March, but the part of the podcast will be on the radio on France Inter around Christmas. So, but they are reading it. I will see their reaction at this point. But they told me that someone had read it without the illustrations. So they did read it without because I sent them two files, one the illustrations, one the text, and they read it without the illustrations, and at this point the reaction is that it fits. Of course it will be better, but nowadays you click on the internet and all these images, you have them on your screen, on your telephone. As I told you, when I was with this old Armenian collector of Persian carpets at the Metropolitan, I told him, yes, it makes me think of the Dessert Rouge, and immediately he took his phone out at 95 to check the painting. So.
Description of Elstir, right?
Elstir.
Of some of the paintings, and then it goes on and on and on.
Oh yes.
Detailed, and so I was.
Yes.
Right? I mean, there is something in the super interesting exercise of the visualization, right? Of description of paintings in words that
I mean, I was just wondering about
Yeah,
this.
I would be very happy to be as thorough as Proust in Le Port de Carquethuit, but I have 630 words
Exactly.
for each,
That's why.
for each piece.
It's sort of a follow-up. I loved your talk. Thank you. A follow-up to Emmanuel's question. I was really struck by your skill as a describer and your skill as a describer and the way the joy that you take in looking at these paintings comes across. So it's very personal in some ways. Do you think the way that you have described literary passages in your work is different from the way that you're describing the visual? Is this sort of a new approach for you through the visual to be able to describe in that way, or do you describe literature in a similar way?
Well, since I came back to New York on Labor Day, I have been to MoMA about 2 or 3 times a week, and to the Metropolitan also 2 or 3 times a week. I need to spend a lot of time. That's why it's better to do those things looking at the reality of the painting. The Russian ones, I've seen them long ago. Well, they came back to Paris. They came to Paris. There were 2 shows in Paris of Shukin and Morozov at the Fondation Vuitton a couple of years ago, but still, it's difficult when you don't have the real painting in front of you to make a good description of the detail. But it's very pleasurable to describe paintings. And it's, yeah, that's the interesting challenge for yeah.
These broadcasts will be in English or in French, and how are they available?
Oh, it will be in French, but now you know if how are they called, these things? iPods? No. Earpods. With earpods, you can listen to any language in the world.
We're not supposed to say that because
What? Ah, yeah, that's right. In a French department, I shouldn't say that. Yeah, I guess so. No, it will be in French. You know that I'm not supposed to speak English. When I go back to the Académie Française, I don't tell my confrères that I give lectures in English because they object to that. I should defend the French language.
I wanted to know, thank you so much. This is wonderful. Closer to the mic. Okay. Why senile instead of, for example, senior? Why senile?
In Latin, there was a distinction between senectus and decrepitas. Senectus is the first part of old age. Decrepitas is the second part of old age. So I don't speak of sublime decrepitas. I speak of sublime senectus, which gives senile. So senile is a positive as opposed to decrepitas. Yeah. I agree that it's a sort of a provocation, senile sublime. But as I said, it's Barbara Ernstein-Smith who uses it in a parenthesis, but I thought it was a good concept to describe this quest for the sublime at the last stage of life, where it is important to get rid of all that is not essential. And this is what some artists did.
First, thank you. One qualification that you give for the senile sublime is that the artist anticipates what's coming from art in the future. So the future art, because the word anticipate means that the art would occur with or without this senile sublime. Do you think it's that they anticipate or that they influence the direction of where art is going in the future?
Anticipate. They are not avant-garde. Matisse is not an avant-gardist. Matisse was never an avant-gardist. As I said, he was a bourgeois. He was a professor. He was apolitical. Matisse has no idea of. Probably never voted. What I mean is, this comes from Adorno's famous article on the late Beethoven quartets. It's based on, I forget the exact name of Adorno's article, where he says that the late Beethoven quartets anticipated Schoenberg. So this is the idea. We have already in an outline of what future generations will do. And this is a view that the Pope of American modernism, Clement Greenberg, reproduced in the relationship between Matisse and abstract expressionism. So for Greenberg, the generation of Rothko, de Kooning, Motherwell, Swift Kelly. There's a whole generation that, let's say, started, and they're, in a sense, in this rivalry between Picasso, the constant rivalry between Picasso and Matisse. One probably can conclude that Matisse was more influential on post-World War II American painting, the all over. You see, I quoted Greenberg now at some point. I think I did, no? No, I quoted Alfred Barr about the most flat painting in Matisse. You know, the planarity of the painting, all that came with after World War II. All these American painters saw the Matisse in exhibitions in New York in the 1930s. Matisse was very present because of Alfred Barr at the modern, at MoMA. So they were very much impressed by what they saw from Matisse, and then with the cutouts after World War II added to that, to the role that he played. So anticipation, that in a sense, like the role Cézanne played for Matisse. He played for this generation. The relationship, in Cézanne, you have these surfaces already that are not nuanced. The absence of nuance in Cézanne, which there are a number of things in Cézanne that you will find in Matisse, let's say, developed. So that's what I mean by anticipation.
One last question.
Then you have a long series of books that you wrote. If you had to recommend one book that you wrote, what would it be?
You know what Matisse said? No, you don't know. when Matisse was asked, you have painted 1,000 works. Which one do you prefer? And what did he say? The latest one. The latest one. Always the latest one. And Matisse also said, la conclusion d'un tableau, c'est un autre tableau. So,
And the latest book is
what?
in free, is like being produced right now, and it's going to be out in
What?
January, right? Your latest book is 1966.
This comes out in...
Is that the latest book?
Ah,
What is the latest book?
No, I have a book which comes out in January in Paris, which is called 1966, Année Mirifique, because the title was Annus Mirabilis, but they thought there shouldn't be Latin in the title. So it's called Année Mirifique, and it's about the year 1966 as a major turning point in French society, politics, culture, etc. I gave lectures at the Collège de France a long time ago on 1966, and I think it's a crucial year in France, in French modernity. But if I start speaking of 1966, I could. The book is the book on 1966. I just corrected the proofs. It's 534 pages, I think I told you. So it's a long book, not like the Matisse, the Winter Movie Matisse, which is so it's good to alternate. That's why I said I was not ready to jump into another book, and the Matisse was a sort of pleasure.
So we'll have you back. The 1966 and the Matisse is like the fox and the fox and the hedgehog. So I see that your books also fit this model of the fox and the hedgehog. So maybe
the fox and the hedgehog.
So this we'll have you back for the.
So this is more
for the fox. I hope I got it right.
It's more like a fox book, you say?
Yes. Exactly. So thank you so much, and. We're looking forward to the podcast and the book.